So I would want to welcome you all again to the Youth Knowledge Forum 2022 virtual session. Today's session that I'm personally very excited for due to I'm in the industry as well, and I would love to know more. We have amazing panelists with us, which is youth on social media. Very important topic as we see around us. Social media is controlling and is everywhere, and youth are very involved on social media. Today we're going to know about opportunities and challenges. So what are we going to discuss more with our panelists today is the impact of social media on youth's life, which I think all of us would want to know about, having a safe space on social media, which is very important, and curating positive online presence, and building a sense of community in a virtual world, which I think our panelists are going to explain it perfectly for us and going to let us know. Just to introduce our panelists with us today, which I'm very excited to hear from them. We have Monica Anderson, which is Associate Director of Research at Pew Research Center. And then we have Bailey Barner, Founder and CEO of Skills Camp Soft Skills Training Company. And Tom Otten, Founder and CEO of Creative Group Regional Leading Agency. So panelists, I'm so happy that I'm with you today. I'm so happy that we're talking about a very important topic. I'll start by introducing myself as well. My name is Azza Al-Mugheri. I am an ex-TV TV reporter, and I entered the social media world almost 7 years ago. I have my online radio. It's a digital platform called Read Radio, where I discuss very important, controversial topic in the region. But I can say 5 years ago, I'm full-time. My job is a social media content creator. So I'm very excited to know all the information that we need to know in the region and outside as well when it comes to the social media world. So I think, just not to take it further, I would want to kick the session off with Monica and start with her first.
Thank you so much. So I have a couple of slides that I wanted to share today that walks you through some of our data in the US related to youth and social media. So I'm just going to pull those up. So I wanted to kind of first get started by discussing a bit more about my organization. So Pew Research Center is a nonpartisan, non-advocacy fact tank located in Washington, D.C. We primarily do public opinion polling, but we have a number of demographers and data scientists as well. My team in particular studies much of what I'll be sharing with you today, so teens and tech use, but we study everything from driverless cars to online dating to public attitudes about digital privacy and surveillance. All of our work can be found on our website, and that's pewresearch.org. And you can also follow us on Twitter and follow me on Twitter as well. So I thought it would be good to get started by just looking at what the social media landscape looks for teens today in the US. So we did a survey earlier this year of teens, and one of the key things we wanted to track is how has use of certain platforms maybe changed or ebbed over time. And what we see is that one of the biggest platforms that teens use is YouTube. So 95% of teens in our survey said that they use that site. Next up is TikTok. 67% use that platform, and then you have about 6 in 10 that are Instagram or Snapchat users. One of the biggest differences that we've seen looking at teen use over the last decade or so is that there's been a very big drop off in the share of teens who say that they are Facebook users. So when we asked this question in 2014, about 70% of teens said that they use that site. That number has dropped to about a third today. So it really speaks to how fast that the social media landscape can change for youth. In addition to Facebook, we see about a quarter of teens use Twitter, and then smaller shares use things like WhatsApp or Tumblr. So in addition to asking teens which sites they use, our survey also wanted to get a little bit deeper into the frequency of site use. And we see that for some platforms, teens report using sites on an almost constant basis. So nearly 20% of teens in the US say that they are almost constantly on YouTube, that number is 16% for TikTok. And then for Instagram and Snapchat, those respective numbers are 10 and 15%. Again, not to sound like a broken record, but Facebook use among teens in the US has not only has it declined in less than a decade, we see that only 2% of teens would categorize that site as something they use almost constantly. One of the things that we've also studied beyond platform use is just in hyperconnectivity overall. And we get at this through a question of asking internet frequency use. So whether or not you say you use the internet about once a day, several times a day, or almost constantly. And one of the biggest changes that we've seen over time is that youth are telling us that they are spending more and more time online. So actually the share who say that they use the internet almost constantly has nearly doubled from 24% in a study that we did in 2014 to 46% this year. And in addition to understanding the trend over time, we see that more teens are saying that they're use the internet on a near constant basis. We can also have the opportunity to look at how that differs by demographic groups. And so we see that teens in the US, those that are more likely to use the internet frequently are those who are Black or Hispanic. We also see differences by age. So older teens are more likely than younger teens to say this. And we see some gender differences as well. So teen girls are a bit more likely than teen boys to categorize their internet use as almost constant. So in addition to studying the types of platforms teens use, how often they use the internet, our study also wanted to bring teens' own voices into their own experiences. A lot of the debate around teens' use of social media are centered around kind of parents and teachers and lawmakers, and we wanted to hear from teens themselves. So one of the key framing questions that we asked was around this idea of whether or not people thought that social media has had a mostly positive or mostly negative effect on people their age, and also the same question about themselves personally. And we see that teens are more likely to view social media as having a potentially negative effect on their peers and on themselves. So 9% of teens in the US say social media has had a mostly negative effect on them. When that same question is asked of their peers, that number rises to 32%. And on the flip side, teens are more likely to say that it's been positive for them versus those who say that it's been positive for people their age. Whether or not teens are talking about their own personal experiences or the experiences of teens overall, the biggest share correlate around this neutral category, which has been neither positive nor negative. But one of the things that we really wanted to drill down into is just, if you say that it's been mostly positive or mostly negative for you, what are some of the main reasons that you feel that way? And when we asked the 32% of teens who said it's been mostly positive, by far the most common reason teens gave revolved around this idea of friendships and connections and socializing. Nearly half of the teens in our survey who said it's been mostly positive mentioned this in some way. You also see a number of teens speaking to it being a place where they can gather information in ways that you couldn't before, and a way to learn and keep up with the news around them. And you also see teens just speak to that it's an entertaining place, they use it for fun, they get positive things out of it. And then people also just say that it can benefit them in terms of their mental health and well-being. And then I wanted to share with you a couple of specific quotes that we heard from teens. So one teen girl said that social media connects me with the world, provides an outlet to learn things I otherwise wouldn't have access to, and allows me to discover and explore my interests. And then you also had a teen boy that spoke to the fact that they feel that they're socially awkward and making friends in person can be difficult. So they have a couple of longtime friends that they've met online and can talk to them on a practically daily basis. And then on the flip side, we did the same thing with the 9% of teens who said it's been mostly negative. And some of the most common responses revolve around these three key things. One, the concern that they are spending too much time on social media and therefore not going out in the world and doing things that they need to do, that it can also be a distraction. You also saw that some teens pointed to social media negatively impacting the way they feel about themselves, whether it's their mental health or their self-image. And then you also see teens just speak to the overall kind of drama-filled environment that social media might inhabit. So talking about it being kind of a negative place. And then you see other teens talk about this idea of there's kind of a social media readiness in which people don't always present who they really are and unrealistic standards. And then just to close out, some of those quotes that we heard from teens who said is mostly negative. So one teen boy mentioned, I think social media has had a negative effect on me because the more I'm on it, the less I'm socially active. I feel like social media has become something I cannot live without, almost like a second limb. And then you see one teen girl saying that social media makes it seem as if you're in a perfect world, but you're actually not. So that's it for the kind of key data points I wanted to share with you. Looking forward to continuing this conversation and all of your questions at the end of the panel.
Monica, thanks so much for sharing that information. It's some of that really jumped out. It was incredibly interesting. And I'll share a few thoughts with regards to potentially more of a regional and local flavor to some of the data points. But one of the things that really jumped out to me was that 46% statistic you put out there, saying that 46% of people are almost constantly online, which is, for me, when I first read that, I thought it was incredibly impactful. From the starting point, it really shows to me the importance of making sure that that social and the internet is a safe space for the youth of today, making sure that ourselves as leaders in this space and those that can have influence, we really do have a responsibility to make sure that we're doing absolutely everything that we can to create this safe space, because of the growing percentage of time that's being spent on it. It's, we look at those statistics compared to the last time that census was done, and I'm sure when this is done in 5 years' time, unfortunately, that's probably going to grow again. So it really does stand out as something that we really need to focus on, which showcases the importance of conversations like this. And that's from a more negative standpoint, but I'd say from a positive standpoint, it's a huge opportunity to engage with and educate the youth of today and of tomorrow. Never before have we had the ability to engage with the future leaders of tomorrow in such a way. So again, whilst that's a huge responsibility, shaping the viewpoints and potentially shaping the leaders of tomorrow, it's a huge responsibility, but a massive opportunity for us to be able to connect with an audience that, previously, prior to social media, it would have been very difficult to connect with youth at such a large scale. So there are significant positives as well as potential, I wouldn't say threats, but some potential challenges as well. It's very interesting. It leads on to my other point. The second most common response to one of your questions around why social has had a positive impact was with information and learning. So it shows that the youth that are utilizing social in this way are using it not only to socialize as a unsurprisingly, the premier reason for being online, but looking to learn, engage, and grow knowledge in a variety of different ways. And we know that social is a very good way of doing that. Again, it comes with challenges. If I take a look at some of the statistics and relate that to some of the local statistics, recently in the Arab Social Media Report, which was put out by Dubai government, in similarity to this, the respondents said around about a third of the respondents said that they were almost constantly online, which is a high number in itself, not as high as 46%, but it shows that the trend remains the same here. I'm not sure on the particular demographics of that survey, but it shows overall that the top line trend is the same in the Middle East as well as it is with your American statistics. There are a few things that jump out when I look at the more localized and more regional stats. The mean average time per day of social usage is around 4 hours. Now that goes up and down depending on various GCC countries. It's 5 hours in Saudi, 3 hours in Bahrain. This information comes from Statista, but it showcases that there are nuances to every country, to every demographic, and to every different user group when it comes to utilizing social media. And social media we talk as a broad brush. Now, if we take out WhatsApp, because I see that it's slightly different as a primary messaging platform, but if we look at, let's say, the more traditional platforms of social, again, it's different across country to country. But one thing that really stood out to me as well is the usage of YouTube, whilst remaining the same across the MENA region, around about 95% in terms of overall usage rates, which is similar to your statistics from the US. One that really stood out, which is, again, quite mind-blowing, is the usage of YouTube in Saudi Arabia. You can actually reach, and this is statistics from Google, you can reach 82% of Saudi's total population through YouTube. And those statistics come from Google themselves, and it's incredibly powerful as a medium of communication. There are many cultural nuances to that, which we don't have time to go into today, but very interesting in terms of the depth of usage of platforms. If we look at, let's say, closer to home in the UAE versus Saudi, the likes of Twitter being a major platform in Saudi, less so in the UAE. Instagram being more of a platform that's used here in the UAE in comparison to Saudi. So there are a lot of nuances in terms of how we communicate. In terms of my role as the CEO of a digital communications agency across the region, we work with all of the platforms in different ways in different countries. We have to create different plans, strategies, communications plans to reach different audiences across all of the different countries. It cannot be, the MENA region cannot be treated as one homogenous group of people, one homogenous statistical breakdown. It's very nuanced in different areas. I'll give you one example. In the MENA region overall, there's approximately 8.5 social channels on average, 8.5 social channels per person. If you break down total channels, so total accounts rather via social media users across the region. But here in the UAE, that goes up to 10.5, which is actually the highest globally. So there are more social accounts per person in the UAE than there is anywhere else in the world, which is actually a statistic that I didn't know until recently, doing research for this talk, which really stood out to me. Whilst we know that cell phone penetration, for example, is significantly higher in the UAE than in most other countries, I hadn't seen that translated until recently in terms of different social accounts, obviously with the number of platforms that there are. So it's, I would say whilst the numbers are changing in comparison to some of the statistics we're seeing from the US, the trends are very much the same. Usage is going up. Platform usage in terms of specific platforms might be slightly different, but everything that we're talking about today around creating safe spaces, making sure that we're owning our responsibilities as individuals, as organizations, but in the world that I work in, certainly as brands, as an agency, and I'll get onto that a little bit later, but there's a real role for brands to make sure that they're adding positively to the conversation, adding positively to the dialogue amongst youth and with youth. And there's been recent examples, again, I'll get onto a little bit later, around where that's gone wrong. But there are many examples of where social media has played a real fundamental role as part of the fabric of our society in bringing people together and affecting positive change. And we've seen that over the years, and certainly with modern history across the region, the role that social has played in achieving many significant social outcomes.
Thank you, Tom and Monica, for sharing that with all of us, because I find it incredibly enriching for myself. I'm learning being here as well. And to everyone who's come to join today, I'm really proud of you for showing up and committing to expanding your own mind, and especially with something like this that affects all of us, even if we're not online ourselves. It's impacting our news, how people interact with each other, our own relationships. And so it affects all of us in some way. as I mentioned, I own a soft skills development company, but I also own a nonprofit called Save Social. And my area is more in social media's relationship with mental well-being. And then kind of well-being has just kind of expanded over the years. I'm from Canada, and we work primarily in North America, but I've also fortunately been in classrooms with young people in South America, Europe, the whole MENA region. And so I can say that this is actually very much in line. This is probably the most modern research I've seen in line with what I've experienced over the last decade on the ground with young people. And our approach at Save Social and in my research has always been more of a harm reduction approach. So there are very clearly benefits here. We call it a risky behavior. So in psychology, a risky behavior would be very simply something where when you participate, you expose yourself to potential harm. And we know for sure now that you expose yourself to potential harm in the online world and on social media. And some of that could be, you could become frustrated, you could become stressed, you could compare yourself, low self-esteem, or even more serious like harassment, abuse, PTSD. All these things are a potential risk of using. So it is a risky behavior like drugs or alcohol or even driving. And if you think about it like such, that does not mean that there are not also benefits here. I certainly enjoy a glass of wine, but I also know how to do it safely. And so what I really thought was interesting reflected in this recent report, which I actually have not seen in many others yet, is that the teens are starting to say, actually, we have a good time here too. And the nuance of the qualitative data and actually hearing their language was saying, no, wait, we do connect with friends here. We do learn, we do find it informative. And perhaps what was also most of interest for me was the 59% that said they had neither a positive or negative effect. Now, I think what's super interesting is that all of us here, literally right now, are the people who are defining what this is going to look like in history. And so we've seen teens 10 years ago who kind of got online in the middle of their puberty teenage journey. But now teens are saying, I've never known any other life. My parents have been on social media my whole life. They've been documenting my life. And so when I see 59% think that it has a neutral effect on them, I guess that, of course, like that makes a lot of sense because they don't know any other baseline. If you talk to young people today, they'll never say like, oh, in my online life or in my offline life, like we think about it sometimes. They'll just say like, this is just life. Like social media is just part of life. So if you've never had a baseline of anything else, you're going to say, well, it's neither positive or negative. It's just like, this is the baseline, which is super interesting to see that reflected. And then the second thing that stood out to me in the research was them, Monica, what you pointed out with them thinking that it negatively affects others more than themselves. And this is kind of the case that this is optimism bias, which is essentially the tendency to overestimate the likelihood that good things will happen to you. So essentially we think good things happen to me, bad things happen to other people. And I can see all the bad things happening to other people, but not me, because I get the learning and I have all the fun. And I think this is where all of us here have a responsibility, most especially the researchers, adults in this virtual forum, we have a responsibility to help teens in that space. Because like other risky behaviors, like driving, like drinking that teens might engage with for the first time ever in their life, teens overestimate, or probably actually underestimate the risk to themselves. The risk portion of their brain is compromised during teenagehood. This is just proven and known. And so the risk associated with social media would also be seen as less. Paired with optimism bias, that's where we come in and we say, yeah, we know you've got it all handled, but listen up, because here's what might happen. And we want you to have more of that positive impact. We want you to be able to learn and connect with your friends, but just watch out, because if you're not feeling good, if you're not feeling good about yourself, that is not when you want to go on Instagram. This is a risky behavior, and the risk would be higher if your mental health was already compromised. That's where we come in, most especially in this part of life. So I'd say what I like seeing is that the teens themselves are reflecting this harm reduction approach. If we've got 95% on YouTube, and we've got 46% of them using it almost constantly, I would be laughed out of the room if I went into a classroom and said, you need to all get off tomorrow. That's the only solution here. So I like this nuance in the conversation. I hope we can keep it going.
I would like to thank all your comment on Monica's research. And to be very honest, being on social media myself, I know that most talks is about negative. And the effect of social media on us and on our generation and on, especially on youth. I mean, I did start my journey on social media when I was younger. That was like 10 years ago. I'm in a different phase right now, and I have a thicker skin. I want to start with you, Monica, please, with a question on the research. You said, well, I know you didn't give us like it's all negative or it's more positive, but I've noticed you gave us a sign that there is positivity, especially with the feedback of teens saying that is a comfortable place, they see themselves more, and the fact that they see it as a positive place. Yeah, we have a percentage that said it's negative, but I kind of sense from your research that there is positivity, which is what I am not hearing mostly when it comes to from my generation when it comes to social media on youth. So I want to ask you, do teens experience a different kind of, let's say, feeling depending on their demography? Because we saw the demography you posted, like their gender or where they're from. And why do you think it's that? Like, why does it affect where they're from or their demography or all that?
Yeah, thank you for that. You're exactly right. What we hear from teens is a very much more kind of nuanced take at what their experiences are. While we see that there are some teens that are struggling with certain things on social media, and that does not kind of negate the fact that they can seek out and have positive experiences on these very platforms. One of the things that I did want to highlight is that when we ask teens about kind of a set of questions on kind of how social media makes them feel more connected to their friends, whether or not it helps them show their creative side, helps them get support, we see a majority of teens across demographic groups do report having those kind of positive experiences. So that is something that is true among teens, regardless of their age or gender or race or their parents' socioeconomic status. What we do see is when we ask questions that are more on the negative side. So we ask teens some sets of questions that focused on whether or not social media made them feel as if there was a lot of drama on these sites, whether or not they had to feel like their friends were leaving them out of things, or if social media actually made them feel worse about their own life. And we see that girls consistently are more likely than boys to be having these type of negative experiences. And I think that is a real key here, is that there's also, as we say that there's nuanced experience, there's not a one size fits all experience for all teens. And this is what we found in this study, but we've had other surveys that do point to teen girls having a more negative experience on social media when it comes to boys. We also have some findings that show that for teen girls that are older, so in our survey, it would be those ages 15 to 17, they're more likely to say they don't post things because they're concerned that someone might use it to embarrass them. And so, again, I think that, out of all the different demographic difference that we see, gender is one that seems to show up when we're talking about the more negative experiences.
And Monica, out of curiosity, just because I have daughters, you said that mostly who see social media as a negative is actually girls. Why do you think that? Is it because they get criticized more? Is it because they get bullied more? Is it because it has to do with body and image? Or why do you think, from your perspective, to be honest, that girls more see it as negative than boys?
Well, I think specifically I'll say two of the things that we see is that girls are more likely to report having an experience in which drama becomes a big part of their social media life. And some of our kind of focus group work, it also hinges on experiences with cyberbullying and online harassment. And that's something that teen girls do speak to. I think another thing that stands out with teen girls is they're more likely than boys to feel as if their friends are leaving them out of things on social media. And so much of it too is the interpersonal relationships, the kind of kind of infighting that can happen between groups. So our survey didn't really kind of delve into why teen girls feel this way, but we've seen this constant pattern in the survey, but also in our focus groups and previous work as well.
Okay, thank you so much, Monica. Bailey, you said something really interesting, which kind of shifts us to a different side. It does go with what Monica said, but you said something very interesting, saying that, yes, we see that it's more, people are saying, okay, the younger generation, especially teens, saying it's a positive place, and they're very happy and all that nice comments. But I want to ask you, mental health. We've seen a lot that I've been on social media and I've went through a very hard mental health because of bullying and stuff like that, being a woman on social media, doing something different and talking about topics. But you said something that even if we see social media as positive, and I'm going to go to Tom with another side saying that agency and it brings money and collaboration and deals, is how do we take care of mental health, especially for teens? Like, how can they do that on social media?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of things that the same sort of things that would affect our mental health offline would affect our experience online as well. So it's actually weird. In my research, what came out as the most important indicator and moderator of young women's experience online was in terms of would it be good or bad experience on social media, and how good or how bad. The biggest one was how they felt about themselves offline at time of use, or what is technically called offline affect. And so it almost sounded exactly like this. If I went to the gym that day and I feel good about myself, then I go on Instagram or TikTok and I see the fitness influencer and I think #goals. So they were still making a positive like an upward comparison where they see this person as better than them for some reason. But if they were feeling like they had made accomplishments on their goals, that same upward comparison actually improved their mental health. They would find it motivating. They would put it on a vision board. I'm the same way. But the other side of that coin was almost a direct quote, her saying, but if I feel bad that day and I go on the same Instagram or TikTok and I see the same fitness influencer, I think I hate my life. That's what she said. So this is, I think, incredibly important for how you actually navigate your experiences on social media, because what it's saying is, yes, of course, different people are going to react to different content. But here we're seeing the same person is going to have a different reaction to different content in different hours based on how they're feeling about themselves. So the reverse engineering that strategy would be, okay, I'm not feeling good right now. I'm stressed. I'm tired. I feel like my friends are leaving me out. Is that the time that I should be using? Is this the time I should be engaging in this risky behavior? If I was talking about a risky behavior like alcohol consumption, and I said, I'm really stressed, and I'm really tired, and I'm feeling like all my friends are not talking to me. If I was talking about any other risky behavior, we would advise young people to not use at that time, because you are not mentally strong enough and you don't know what you're going to see. So it's almost like reversing how we think about that. But then I think to build a positive mental relationship with social media is also very similar to other risky behaviors. It's the 5 steps towards safe social. So I'll share a graphic while I talk about this, but honestly, it's just me saying a little bit more about what I'm going to say to you. The 5 steps, very quickly. What do we need to do with any risky behavior? We need to build awareness and understanding. You attending here today is part of part 1. What is even happening here? What even are the risks of using? What are other teens saying? Like, what can happen to me? Step 2 is, once I've figured out a little bit more about what's happening here and maybe its impact on me, them even participating in Pew's research is a self-reflective exercise, which would be part of part 1. Part 2 is moderating my consumption based on that. Okay, now that I know what it's doing to me, how can I design my feeds to actually serve me? Maybe there's some people that I need to get rid of, that I need to mute, that I need to temporarily block because they actually frustrate me. They're not providing me that motivation or that learning or that connection. Then step 3 is to build the offline soft skills. If you actually want a long-term positive relationship with social media, or I suppose any risky behavior, we would say offline seems counterintuitive at first, build resilience, work on building confidence, like in yourself, offline hobbies, offline relationships, self-awareness. Do you even know the kinds of things that are making you stressed? Have you ever even thought like, oh yeah, like when I do go on this app or when I'm studying for a test, that's when I feel most frustrated. If you build these skills, something like resilience or time management or mindfulness, so I don't find myself an hour later not remembering what I did, then this will translate in your offline life, but it will absolutely also translate in the online life. Step 4, once you know better, you got to do better and help others do better. So it's modeling good behavior and leading by example, like any other risky behavior. What am I posting online? What kind of space am I creating for other people? How do I use my mobile technology when I'm in a conversation with a friend? Leading by example. And then finally, step 5, this is very important. Who's responsible for creating this space? Is holding those responsible parties accountable. And I would say, like any other risky behavior, even something as simple as driving, it's a multi-pronged approach. We need governments to do more. We need the companies themselves to be part of the safety regulations here. We need parents to do more if you're going to let your kid participate in this risky behavior. If you need educators, and we ourselves too, at the end of the day. So I would say it's a long journey, but it's actually one that can start offline tomorrow.
And as I understood what you say, it starts within myself. Like it's kind of, yeah, my surrounding, but it's my responsibility. And is that easy for a team to do? Like, I mean, I know that I'm aware right now, educate myself, but is that
it is in part, I would say it is in part your responsibility as like for you, it's interesting because you mentioned you were a parent of 2 daughters. So you've got this dual lens of, I myself have experienced the benefits of social media. I literally get business from it. I get to influence folks. And then you also have the very worst of social media that's happened to you. And then you have the next lens of, how do I teach my daughters to navigate this space, the parent lens. So it's kind of like, I am in part responsible for my experience on social. But what I'm saying for all of us over here, and what my organization is certainly acting on in terms of policy and whatnot, is you are not solely responsible. Actually, the governments are also part responsible for your well-being here. And the companies are also part responsible. Like any other risky behavior, if you're making all of your money, if your bottom line is keeping people here, the economy of attention is your bottom line, you have responsibility to make sure that young people can do it safely. So yes, what we can do is control our side of it, but then we can also make this an issue. We can bring it to our schools. We can vote accordingly, similar to any other risky behavior or political issue that we're talking about.
Bailey, I mean, I will move to Tom, because I think a very important topic, which is money on social media, and I'm sure this is what interests teens. But I want to ask you, Bailey, because you mentioned that. I mean, because it's a positive place, and we get. I mean, I admit myself being addicted to social media. How can like a team control that? Or I mean, what do you think about that, especially that it's a positive space?
Well, it's not a positive space for everyone. And I think that baseline that Monica was mentioning and that I was mentioning earlier about how 59%, majority of them think this is neither a positive or negative space in the US data. So what's interesting to me is like that baseline, and 46% almost constantly, yes, you're at risk for addiction. So addiction to any risky behavior, if you want to like get into the technical of it, it does require that it has a negative impact on other parts of your life. So with addiction, we actually created a free addiction assessment, which was designed through the lens of how we present signs of addiction to other risky behaviors applied to social media. So, for example, some of the questions it would ask are, do you find yourself an hour blacking out on social media, an hour later not remembering what you did, and to what degree does this happen? Have you put yourself in physical danger because of social media, like maybe you almost got hit by a car or you bumped into someone and tripped, and to what degree does this happen? Do you lie and manipulate situations in order to use, like you say, you're going to the bathroom, but actually you just want to check social media? Do you think about it when you're not using? Like all of these, there's many more questions. And it's a to what degree. So, you know, maybe 1 or 2 questions, you don't have a big ol' worry, but if you're starting to answer all 25 to the utmost degree, this might be consuming your life. Like one of those questions might be, has it harmed your relationships? Have people said to you, hello, I'm talking to you? And to what degree? And so this would say, yeah, then it is harming your other life. And if I'm doing this thing all the time, I'm not remembering what I did, I'm putting myself maybe in physical danger, it's affecting my relationships, it's making me feel bad about myself, and I'm still doing it all the time. If we were talking about any other risky behavior, we would be saying you have signs of addiction and we need to work on this so that you can have well-being in your life. So addiction is absolutely a risk of using, but there are, you know, like other risky behaviors, just because you use it doesn't mean that you are addicted. So that's just the one little caveat.
Okay, I'll be using your questions honestly for me to know what level that I need to take a break or stop. Thank you so much, Bailey. Moving to Tom, I think being on social media myself, I think the most wanted man in this industry, to be very honest. I'm sure working in an agency, teens, you get emails and you get calls that people want to get involved in this industry because there's a lot. If you want to make money and be rich, be a social media influencer or a content creator. We have that reputation that we're rich. So I've been getting that comment a lot since I work in this industry. And I'm sure I'm being an influencer part, but you're being behind the scene, which is the manager, the agency part. How has this been having to, as agencies and as brands, how can we shift to teens that, yes, you can make a business out of this, but as well, there's lines and there is responsibility towards both sides, but I think mostly agencies. Can you tell us more about this?
Sure. I mean, there's 2 sides to it. It goes back to, Bailey, I love the points that you made there, and certainly the 5-step process and the conversation around ownership and responsibility. Whilst I totally agree, not everything is on the individual. There are multiple platforms have to play a role, governments have to play a role, as you've said. But to the individual, it's social is a tool, right? It's a tool and it must be used as such. It needs to work for you. You cannot work for it. And when you put that into the broader context of risky behaviors, sentence probably plays out in many different verticals as well. I think, unfortunately, Bailey, a few of the questions that you posed then, I think we were all nodding, going, yeah, I've done that before. Yep. Someone's also interrupted me when I've been on social saying, hello, I'm here, I'm talking. So unfortunately, I think there are probably small signs with all of us, because as the statistics are showing, many of us are using social for probably a little bit longer than we would like to. Which leads me on to the where I want to take things next, which is a little bit of a pivot from where we've been, but I think is also valuable to the people in the room. And it is around the role of brands and agencies in the social space. If we take this right back to the beginning, we look at those stats, 46% of people of respondents talking about constantly using this, and then we realize how much brands are playing a role in this. Brands can utilize this platform to direct action. We've all bought something because we've seen it on Instagram. I mean, I'm sure everybody in this room has clicked through and done that. Social commerce, although I'm not going to go down that route in this conversation, is growing year on year significantly. And the tools that each of the platforms are bringing out almost on a quarterly basis to drive more sales, to drive more usage. To pivot back slightly to a previous point, one thing that popped into my head is we have to remember as individuals, we are singular individuals with Paleolithic instincts, and we're up against a team of scientists, behavioral scientists that are designing these platforms to make us do X, Y, and Z. There's some very intelligent, well-paid people that are spending all day on that. And then there's us sitting there with the phone in our hands, wondering why we're spending too much time on those platforms, right? It's a little bit uneven in terms of the odds of success for ourselves. So it's challenging for us. So don't be too hard on yourself if you're using social a little bit more than you'd like to. But in terms of brands have inserted themselves into the social fabric of society, and they've done that very much through advertising campaigns from way back when. But where the world sits now, it's very much on social. When I started the agency 12 years ago, we're a digital agency, and we were fighting for 15 to 20% of the budget. Now the reality is it's 90% of the budget. Most things go out on social first, and that's where brands play in that space. We're fortunate to work with brands such as Dubai Tourism and variety of different cultural brands. But if we look more commercial, we work with VW across the region as well, influencing people to purchase cars. And how brands choose to play in this space, how brands choose to show up, whatever brand that might be, is really important. They have a moral obligation to add positivity because that's the right thing to do from a human standpoint, but it's also the right thing to do from a business standpoint. We've seen this blow up in brands' faces, getting it wrong. The Balenciaga campaign, I won't go into that, but you can Google it and you can read about what happened. I mean, horrendous what went on there, and that's blown up in the brand's face. And when we talk about the role of the agency, the brand is now suing the agency. So it shows that the agencies play a real role here. My job and my agency's job is to work with brands to help them show up in the right way on social. We are the originators of campaigns, but we're also the gatekeepers. So if we go back to talking about, let's say, equality in every sense of the word, it would be our role to be suggesting, okay, well, you're trying to speak to these target audiences, but we should show up in a way that is inclusive and representative of the audiences. Because if we go back and we tie this back into mental health, which we've touched on in a few different ways in this conversation today, if people are seeing models and influencers and those that are representative of them in whatever that might be, whether it be gender, race, body type, all of these things, if they see that as representative, it's not going to be damaging mental health. It's actually going to be motivating people to be like, okay, it's not just some perfect version of the world that is on social media and there's me that doesn't look like this and therefore that's negatively affecting me. So brands have a real responsibility to make sure that they are being inclusive and playing a positive role in society in the way that they engage in social. If we look at a few campaigns, the Nike Equality campaign, Nike Equality campaign, was a really interesting one that took global athletes, many of which you will all know, Serena Williams, LeBron, a variety of others, and it touched on fairness and respect on the court and all of the things that we talk about when it comes to positive gamesmanship on the court and showing up as an athlete and engaging as a team and all that positive behavior, and trying to take that and translate it to values and behaviors off the court, but driving very much with regards to equality and respect, and linking those two things. Nike shows up in many ways as a positive brand that really takes positive stances on many social issues, and some of them have been very controversial. If you look back through the history of Nike marketing, they've taken huge risks, especially, I mean, we almost expect that from them now, but if you look back to the earlier years, you'll really be impressed, and I'm impressed as a marketer to see the stance that they've taken that can significantly affect their brands. If I just touch on a negative outcome of that is the situation with Kanye and the direction that he went in, and all of the brands very quickly having to move away from that because it cannot be representative of their brand in that way. So there are many different examples of how things can positively and negatively show up. Another one that I really liked in terms of a campaign was River Island Labels Are for Clothes, which champions self-expression and challenged stereotypes across the region. Which are very interesting, diving into inclusivity and representation across the MENA region and wider, and showcasing again brands can play a real role in bringing dialogue to the fore to really help change social narrative that plays out on social media around these really key pillars of how not only teens, youth, but a society as a whole need to be changing and evolving. And thankfully, I believe that society is evolving through the use of social. And I do see it as a very much a positive tool, but it's a reflection of society as well. So there are very much risks, there are very much negatives, there are very much opportunities for doing better. But there are also so much so there are communities that are being built that would never have been built otherwise. A friend of mine, Manal Rostam, set up Surviving Hijab. And she's done some incredible work. I've had her on our podcast a few times, and she recently summited Everest. So again, plant the flag on top of Everest and showcase to the world what a hijabi athlete is capable of achieving. And she's challenging stereotypes, and she's bringing over 1 million people together in her Facebook group, and she has a team supporting her with that. And she's been on stage with Sheryl Sandberg at Facebook HQ talking about that. These things would never have happened if social media didn't exist. These communities would have stayed within towns, within cities, within friendship groups, and now there's 1 million people that are together talking about something that's so important. We've mentioned, as you mentioned, about content creators, influencers. I really prefer the term content creator rather than influencers. And a few points with relation to what I'm talking about here. Much of how brands show up in social space does come from the growing use of influencers. And why I'm trying to add some value to the audience listening here, and why I'm bringing that up. But over in the US, over 2/3 of teens and youth follow an influencer of one kind or another, whether that be music, gaming, fashion, lifestyle, and the like, which shows us there is a huge responsibility for not only brands, but very much influencers, which are not regulated, in my view, as much as they should be, because of the power that they have in terms of changing action and changing views within youth. There's many doing an incredible job showing up and really driving social causes, talking about mental health awareness. I've got some friends in this space that create amazing content around body positive narratives and these areas that have been neglected in the earlier years of social. It's great to see that the narrative is changing in many places. To your point earlier, Bailey, around it's definitely very important. The offline mental, let's say, space that they're in at the time, and then they engage with a fitness influencer. Sometimes that's positive, sometimes that's negative. But there are more people online that are talking about, look, this is Instagram versus reality. We've all seen that. But I know that we're getting short on time. One of the things I want to leave the audience with this particular point is the question that the youth of today need to ask is, does this person have the knowledge or the qualification to be giving you this advice, especially if I'm then going to choose to take that action? If it's if it's lifestyle and we're talking travel or we're talking fashion, this is not so important in this context. But what I mean is, if they're promoting something that's potentially medical or nutrition based, or if it's something you're going to ingest because you've watched it on TikTok, this is a question that and this goes back to personal ownership that we touched on earlier. You have to take ownership of the fact that you're consuming this content, and you have to ask these questions. Does this person have the qualifications to give me this information if I'm about to act on it? And something more from the motivational space that I've certainly lived my life by is, if they've not achieved what you're looking to achieve, don't listen. It's as simple as that, because many people will talk because they have an opinion, but have they done it? Do they know about it? Are they qualified to give you this advice? And these are the questions that you need to ask. And I hope I answered your question comprehensively there, Hazza.
No, you did. You covered a lot of amazing areas as well, and covered the next questions I had. I know we are short on time. We did get a lot of questions. So I want to thank everyone for sending their Q&A. Mostly are repeated. So I'm going to try to ask questions, and whoever wants to answer or feels like they want to answer, they can. So one of the most important thing, which I think it's very important since we all go through it, is, are youth more exposed to affected by misinformation? And how can we predict that or make it this? How can teen knows that the information that they get online? And you said something very interesting, Tom, is like, don't believe anything you say, and be aware of who to take information from or not. But being on social media, youth do get access to misinformation.
And I think, Bailey, you go ahead.
So it's funny because generationally you would think like there's a really strange thing happening in this period of history, which is, what is your level of digital literacy? And so you would think, like in any other world, that teens would be more at risk, and they are more at risk for many things. But interestingly, they are typically more digitally literate than their, say, boomer counterparts or their grandparents. And so I've seen a lot of people who are victims of misinformation in my own family, because they weren't taught things even in school, like how to read simple things like how to read a URL, or make sure that the email is coming from your real friend instead of like Tom at xyz.org or something, right? So little things like this that the teens are like, oh yeah, that's like, they wouldn't even like pay attention to that. They would just give it a nice scroll. And but at the same time, we would also want to teach teens how to find proper sources offline. We would want to teach them how to do that online too. Are you finding the same, Monica, Tom?
So one of the things that we heard in our focus groups of teens did talk about this concern about not knowing who to trust, not knowing where to go to, where to find that kind of information. And that's, something that we can see with other generational groups. I think particularly with teens who are online more constantly than older generations, they're using social media at higher rates. There's also the idea of more exposure to just more information. And so even kind of beyond misinformation, it's the information overload, right? And so how do you make sense of it all? And that's something we definitely heard from our teens in our focus groups.
I think it's certainly a real challenge. It's a very topical question at the moment. If you look at the, let's say, challenges that Elon Musk is facing over at Twitter, and that's come up quite recently, is the verification mark, and that didn't go well for Twitter recently, with a lot of impersonation accounts showing up quite quickly and pretending to to be who they weren't, and posting content that caused quite a few issues. And they dialed that back quite quickly. But the point being is that it's particularly challenging to determine the source of information and to make sure that that is correct. To your point, Bailey, my dad has sent me information and said, "Wow, have you seen this?" I look at it and I literally look at where it's come from. I'm like, I'm not even clicking that because I know it's rubbish. But he doesn't know. He doesn't know that it hasn't. It looks like a news channel. It looks like it's set up in exactly the same way. He doesn't have the skill set to determine the difference. So the digital literacy is critical, and that's certainly something that can certainly be taught, and that's something we should drive towards. The one thing I would touch on, which is slightly scary, is the rapid growth of AI integration into social. We see deep fakes. We see content that's being created that looks photorealistic. I'll give you an example. It's starting to show, like Midjourney, for example, and DALL-E, some of these platforms that are creating this AI-generated content. You can put in prompts to say photorealistic XYZ. Now, if that shows up from a potential, let's say, quote unquote, journalist saying, "Look at what's just happened. I've just taken a photo of this thing that's happened." Meanwhile, it's been created with AI. That event never even occurred, and that image then goes out around the world. You can see how that can get shared, saying, "Oh my God, look at what's just happened," and everyone's sharing it. Meanwhile, the incident maybe didn't even occur. And we're going to go through this as AI starts to integrate across social. This is going to show up, and that's something that we need to be very careful of, because it's going to be very difficult to know whether that particular instance was real or it was literally a prompt that was put into an AI engine.
Nice. I agree with the point that sometimes actually teens are more aware than us. I do agree with that. I want to wrap it up with the question that I want to hear from all of you briefly before we end. And I do apologize. We did receive a lot of questions, but I knew that it was a deep topic that we needed more than an hour for that. Okay, if I can ask each one of you, what role do youth play in shaping the future of media? And do they actually play a role or no?
Yes, the answer is yes. You play a role. You play a very big role, because the youth, in terms of culture, in any culture, offline or online, youth have always played a very dramatic role in what the future of that culture is going to look like. And so it may seem as an individual that you don't have that much power when you're talking about one influencer that you follow. But every time you give anything a piece of your attention, whether it's a like, a comment, 0.5 seconds longer staring at it, or a share to your friends in the DMs, that becomes a recorded transaction attributing value to something in the economy of attention. How you spend your attention is actually very important. As important these days is how you spend your dollars. So I would say, as a consumer, you play a role. As a consumer consuming content, you play a role. As an individual who's going to vote soon, what is your stance on big tech, and what is your stance on their integration with, say, U.S. politics? Because a lot of them are based out of America. So you play that role. You play the role of leader, a peer leader. What kind of role are you setting to your friends? What are you seeing, Monica?
Yeah, I would echo what Bailey said. I mean, teens are the vanguard of tech adoption. So, as we showed in the chart, teens are less likely to use Facebook compared to in the past, but in the past, they were the drivers of that growth. They're the drivers of the growth when it comes to TikTok or Instagram. And so we often look to teens, they're setting the trends for what might happen with the adult population. And in addition to that, when you look at kind of cultural norms, when you look at music, when you look at politics, when you look how teens are engaging with content around online activism, for example. So sharing their thoughts about changing norms related to gender or race, we're often looking at young people that are driving those conversations. So they definitely have a role to play and have been playing a major role in that.
I'd certainly agree with both. And teens are the leaders of tomorrow in every aspect of society. If you look at how society has been shaped over the last, let's say, the last decade by youth and millennial generation, brands have had to pivot in order to appeal to what it is that that generation is saying is okay or not okay. We've developed in terms of equality. We've developed in terms of well, many areas of equality. But if I stay there for a second, brands have had to pivot into the space that is relatable to those individuals and those communities. If we look at more recently, thankfully, brands being more sustainable, and the world is being forced to be more sustainable because that's what society demands, and brands are pivoting in that way. So new brands coming out saying, no, we're carbon neutral, we're this, we're that, the other. They're not doing that just for the sake of humanity. They're doing that because they also understand to appeal to an audience that they want to sell to. If I'm being realistic here, they have to be known for these things. It's very important to the new generation. So I would say to the teams that are coming up is you actually control the future. What you demand is that is what will happen, because brands will have to cater to your needs, your wants, your desires. So if you make the intention and it's strong, brands will pivot to you. You can bend the world to your wants and desires. So I would say the power is very much in teams.
Monica, Bailey, Tom, thank you so much. We had a beautiful session. I really had so much to discuss more, and I'm sure our audience as well. We've learned the power of social media. Believe it or not believe it, it does have a strong power, and it's taking over. The importance of teen to have to give them a positive space on social media as well, and our mental health. The advices that Bailey gave us was amazing. And as well, how teen can turn this into a business for them. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Monica. Thank you, Bailey. You opened our eyes. Thank you so much. And of course, I want to thank you and DP and Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum Knowledge Foundation for the Youth Knowledge Forum and for this amazing session. I just want to remind everyone that tomorrow they'll be having a lot of sessions, so stay tuned for tomorrow's agenda. They're going to be a session with disability, mental health, SDG advocates, and digitalization. So another important topics to discuss. I hope you all enjoyed today's session. And again, I want to thank all our panelists for this beautiful insights when it comes to social media. I hope you all have a beautiful night. I mean, for you guys, beautiful day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was indeed super interesting. We did not get much time to relay the questions of the audience. We received many. So we'll be sending a follow-up email with like most of the questions.